This message comes from NPR sponsor Rosetta Stone, an expert in language learning for 30 years. Right now, NPR listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership to 25 different languages for 50% off. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR. This message comes from NPR sponsor Lands' End Outfitters. You've worked hard to build your brand, so why settle for one-size-fits-all clothing? Lands' End Outfitters creates apparel your employees truly want to wear. See why Lands' End Outfitters has been a branded apparel supplier to some of the world's most respected brands for more than 30 years. Go to business.landsend.com/pod20 and use code POD20 for 20% off your first product. That's business.landsend.com/pod20, code POD20.
Hello. I'm Brittany Luce, and you're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR, a show about what's going on in culture and why it doesn't happen by accident. All right, everybody. This week, we are connecting the dots between Columbia University, Cool Hand Luke, and William F. Buckley. I already know you are asking, how are all of these things connected? Well, today we are going to find out with NYU journalism professor Chenjerai Kumanyika and author Rick Perlstein. His books like Nixonland and Reaganland trace the rise of conservatism in America. Chenjerai, Rick, welcome to It's Been a Minute.
Yeah.
So excited to be here.
Happy to have you both. All right, so let's set the stage for this conversation. Last weekend, Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil was arrested by federal immigration authorities. Khalil was one of the student leaders in Columbia University's campus protests against the war in Gaza. He's now a graduate of the university. What's important to note about his arrest is that Khalil is, in fact, a green card holder, meaning he is a lawful, permanent resident of the United States. So why are federal immigration authorities going out of their way to detain a legal resident of the United States who hasn't committed any crimes? Well, President Trump said Khalil's arrest is the first of many to come as part of a policy to punish protesters who his administration claims are terrorist sympathizers or supporters of Hamas. This is something that President Trump himself campaigned on during the 2024 election.
Under my administration, we will proactively send ICE to pro-jihadist demonstrations to enforce our immigration laws and remove the violators from our country.
But to be clear, Khalil has no known ties to Hamas or any terrorist organization. And of course, protesting is a right protected by our First Amendment. As soon as this story went public, people, and I mean everyone from political pundits to regular everyday folks, were like, how is this possible? Isn't this a violation of the First Amendment? You know, one of the things that we're taught makes America America. You know, what makes Americans American is that we all have the right to free speech and the right to peaceably assemble. So in what ways is this one protester's arrest a rewriting of what it means to be an American? So, Rick, Chenjerai, the question on everyone's mind, is Mahmoud Khalil's arrest the beginning of the end of the right to protest?
Donald Trump only has one power, and that's to give orders. The rest of us, 300 million, have the power to refuse or accept those orders, right? And so it's up to us whether the First Amendment survives or dies, but this is a real gut check moment. It's kind of one of those, first they came for the Palestinian activist, and I did not speak because I was not a Palestinian activist. And we all know how that story ends.
Chenjerai, what do you think? Is the First Amendment essentially kaput?
Well, so many of these executive orders and actions aren't legal and they don't stand up in court. So what Trump is really doing here is actually performance, right? I mean, he wants to create a sort of spectacle and performance that's so compelling to his audiences that no one even cares about the law or the First Amendment. But of course, Trump is good at this, right? We didn't meet this guy because he was a legal expert. Most folks met Trump because he was performing a kind of silly reality show or being like a kind of rich but cartoonish business person, right? So Like, he understands performance, and unfortunately, it's not just performance, right? There's a real cost here.
Okay, I want to get deeper into this fighting for the right to protest because of two reasons. One is that we have seen both Republican legislatures and Democratic cities attempt to curb in the last couple of years the right to assemble. All of this was happening after the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. But at the same time, both Democrats and Republicans are vocal about wanting to protect the right to free speech. I mean, even conservative pundit Miss Ann Coulter was pushing back against the Trump administration's arrest of Khalil. Ann Coulter posted on X this week, "There's almost no one I don't want to deport, but unless they've committed a crime, isn't this a violation of the First Amendment?" So all that said, why is protest historically so important in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, I think every right that I have, that the vast majority of Americans have in this country, is because people protest. At times, people challenge the law. Sometimes people broke laws as part of civil disobedience. And it's interesting because that aspect of protest is what sometimes people who are really proud to be American is usually what they're bragging about. The problem is that protest also challenges whoever is in power at that time. And so there's always an incentive to put protests down.
Yeah, and when you say put protests down, talk to me about what that can look like in terms of how protesters who are speaking out against those in power are regarded or treated.
Well, historically, the way that this is played out is that people who are often fighting to make America a sort of more robust democracy are cast as some kind of internal enemy, right? And that internal threat often has to do with people's ethnicity, their immigration status. I mean, there's a long history, right? It's not just like when you hear Trump sort of saying that there's an internal enemy, which he was saying on the campaign trail.
I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics.
He's tapping into a long history of rhetoric that does that.
Okay, yeah. Give me an example of that long history that Trump is tapping into.
Well, we could go all the way back to the 19th century and look at, the different like European ethnic groups who were fighting on the labor front. We could talk about the civil rights movement. We could talk about Claudia Jones. I mean, in all these cases, the government cast these people as actually the danger, even though now most of the things they were fighting for are like uncontroversial.
And that makes me wonder why, of all the campus protesters, Mahmoud Khalil was targeted. Like, what message is the Trump administration trying to send? And how does the university play into all of this? Help me wrap my brain around this.
So this guy, William F. Buckley, he burst onto the scene in his early 20s in 1951 with a book called God and Man at Yale. It launched his career as the most important intellectual on the right. And the entire argument of that book was that universities and college professors specifically should not be the ones deciding what young people learn, right? They should not be able to set their curricula. The curricula should be set by the boards of trustees because they're rich Christians who have, skin in the game. And so that's been a kind of a generational project ever since, decade after decade. Ronald Reagan in the 1960s, one of the first things he did as governor was end free tuition for the University of California. That was a reaction to the protests there.
Right. And in fact, Reagan's education advisor famously said to be selective about who is allowed to go to college. Otherwise, his words, we are in danger of producing an educated proletariat.
It was basically manufacturing liberals. And the people who protest are, what we call conservatives, right? And the conservatives are on the catbird seat right now.
Again, one of the things that, those who are patriotic, brag about is that America is a place where you can do some things, you can say some things, and are supposed to have some freedoms to say some things that you can't say other places, right? And that's been crucial to securing certain kind of rights. And it's funny, I think personally about, my father, right? My father worked with an organization called the Congress of Racial Equality.
CORE.
Yeah, CORE, one of the major, civil rights organizations. And
yes,
my father was participating in a protest against police brutality. He handcuffed himself inside a police station. And a couple of weeks later, the police commissioner at the time, Michael Murphy, said that he was dangerous, had sinister motives, and a lust for power. What he was basically saying was, This kind of protest is protesting the wrong way. We're cool if you do it the right way. But it turns out when you look at history from then until now, no matter how you protest, it's considered the wrong way if you're challenging the status quo.
To your point, just this week, President Trump called Tesla protesters, to quote him, domestic terrorists.
Well, that's a legal phrase, right? And this suddenly makes this foreign policy issue, right? If we have an enemy abroad, as declared by the president, suddenly this whole different category of laws applies.
Yeah, it kind of looks like the administration is creating this scaffolding to restrict this kind of protest.
This is a legal scaffolding to outlaw whole categories of speech, using kind of bad faith arguments about, Americans facing threat abroad.
Yeah, I would just say that, historically, when you've seen this kind of oppression in America, it definitely has a chilling effect. It's scary. People get hurt and detained. But, going all the way back to slavery, you actually see groups of people coming together around it as well. Right now, what's happening is I'm actually seeing people come together in the streets. People who formerly disagreed over certain things are saying, this is too far. I can't abide.
Like a galvanizing moment.
This galvanizing, and not just protesters, right? Artists, right? Educators, journalists, people from all sectors of life are saying, we're not going to take this. And so there are those who support it. But when I'm there with people across all these differences, right, that have divided us, and I'm seeing them actually take to the streets and find their ways, whether big or small, to protest, I'm like, this is the America I want to be a part of.
Coming up, Mahmoud Khalil's arrest also raises some other really big cultural questions, like what does it mean that a green card holder can be deported? And why many Americans and Jewish people are skeptical this arrest has anything to do with curbing anti-Semitism.
The idea that these protests are anti-Semitic is a project of gaslighting.
After a quick break.
This message comes from Saatva, the first company to sell luxury mattresses online without the hassle or expense of traditional mattress stores. So Saatva customers have always paid about 50% less than retail. Visit SAATVA.com/NPR today, where NPR listeners save an additional $200. This message comes from Schwab. At Schwab, how you invest is your choice, not theirs. That's why when it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices. You can invest and trade on your own. Plus, get advice and more comprehensive wealth solutions to help meet your unique needs. With award-winning service, low costs, and transparent advice, you can manage your wealth your way at Schwab. Visit schwab.com to learn more.
Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Online. Is your child asking questions on their homework you don't feel equipped to answer? IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid, no matter the age or personality. One subscription gets you everything. One site for all the kids in your home, pre-K to 12th grade. Make an impact on your child's learning. Get IXL now. And NPR listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXL.com/NPR. Support for the following message come from LinkedIn Ads. With LinkedIn Ads, you can reach professionals relevant to your business. Target them by job title, industry, company, and more by launching your next campaign with a free $100 ad credit at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Going back to Mahmoud Khalil. Khalil's wife, who has not been named publicly, and also is 8 months pregnant, she was also threatened with an arrest by ICE. She is an American citizen. And it's notable to me that she was told that Khalil would be detained somewhere close to their home in Manhattan, but he wound up being transferred about 1,000 miles south to Louisiana. What's the purpose of these tactics, and what effect are they meant to have on green card or visa holders?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about intimidation and humiliation, right? I mean, when I thought of a prison in Louisiana, I immediately thought of this classic movie from 1967, Cool Hand Luke.
Cool Hand Luke, I was going to say, yeah.
Right? It was a classic 60s movie because it was about a guy who just kind of instinctively defied authority. He went to jail for cutting the heads off parking meters when he was drunk, right? And he was sent to this prison that was basically run like a concentration camp. And the plot of the movie is basically, very simple. This one guy, this one charismatic guy, Paul Newman, refuses to submit.
The administration, the Trump administration, has tried to frame its thwarting of protest as a way to combat anti-Semitism.
Oh, my.
And that's a claim that some Americans...
You're in my wheelhouse, Brittany.
That is a claim that some Americans have been quite skeptical of. I have seen plenty of Jewish Americans be quite skeptical of that claim.
I quite frequently go to Shabbat dinner at the house of a friend of mine, and I pray alongside the most religiously serious people I know, people who actually study the holy text in Hebrew, of Judaism, and they are all Palestinian solidarity activists. So the idea that these protests are anti-Semitic is a project of gaslighting.
I want to point out, though, that Donald Trump has been closely connected in the past with anti-Semitic figures like Kanye West and Nick Fuentes.
If you look at some of the people he pardoned for January 6th, one guy was wearing a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt. If you look at the Doge worker, right, who was fired because of all his tweets saying that were discovered, saying I wouldn't marry anyone outside my ethnic group if you paid me, or I want more eugenics, right? And the vice president of the United States says, oh, he's not such a bad guy, give the kid another chance, right? Compare that to Mahmoud Khalil.
Yeah, and so I wonder, why do you think anti-Semitism is often ignored on the American right?
Oof, first of all, it's a very clever strategy, right?
Yeah, recently, though, also anti-Semitism in the conservative movement has been one of the engines that has fused and put new energy of young people into the conservative movement. I remember being in Charlottesville where there was huge swastika flags and people explicitly saying, all kinds of anti-Semitic things, replacement theory. And remember, these are the people that Trump kind of defended, right? He said among them were very nice people. And I think in the space of a lot of these protests, I was actually seeing something beautiful, which was, as Rick said, Jewish rituals, seders, and all kinds of other things happening in the space of protest against this war, right? And also seeing Palestinian and Muslim students welcoming Jewish rituals. You're seeing like this tremendous, profound interfaith collaboration that's happening in the protests. And then that's the thing that gets attacked as anti-Semitic?
I have one last question. Freedom of speech, freedom to assemble, these are all foundational parts of the American cultural identity. So if those freedoms become conditional, if those freedoms are in jeopardy, how does that change what it means to be an American?
There's always been this tension, these different ways of defining what it means to be American. One tradition is keeping people out of being American, keeping Black people, Asian Americans. A lot of the immigration laws were initially formed around them, keeping Latino and, other folks out of being American. That's one tradition. There's another tradition, though, that says that's actually what can make this country strong if we constantly push to be inclusive. And so that, Mahmoud Khalil can be at his Ramadan in this country. That's what makes us stronger. And I would simply say that all three of us, the reason we can be in this position now is because of that second tradition.
Well, Chenjerai, Rick, thank you both so much. I've learned so much here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was historian Rick Perlstein and NYU journalism professor and host of Empire City, Chenjerai Kumanyika. This episode of It's Been a Minute was produced by
Corey Bridges.
This episode was edited by
Nina Pathak.
Our supervising producer is
Barton Girdwood.
Our executive producer is
Verilyn Williams.
Our VP of programming is
Yolanda Sanguini.
All right, that's all for this episode of It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Brittany Luce. Talk soon.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Allianz Travel Insurance. Hotel booked? Check. Tickets? Check. Passport? Check. What about travel insurance? Learn how to protect your trip at AllianzTravelInsurance.com. Support for the following message comes from LinkedIn Ads. As a B2B marketer, you know how noisy the digital ad space can be. If your message isn't targeted to the right audience, it just disappears into the noise. By using LinkedIn ads, you can reach professionals who are more likely to find your ad relevant. Target them by job title, industry, company, and more. Get a $100 credit on your next campaign at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. This message comes from Mint Mobile. Mint Mobile took what's wrong with wireless and made it right. They offer premium wireless plans for less, and all plans include high-speed data, unlimited talk and text, and nationwide coverage. See for yourself at mintmobile.com/switch.